She was 8 years old when she stepped through the broken window of the abandoned St. Catherine's Orphanage on Christmas Eve, and what she found hidden in the boiler room would expose a 40-year-old secret worth $265 million.
Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind.
The snow fell heavy over Millbrook that Christmas Eve, blanketing the forgotten town in white silence. It was the kind of cold that bit through worn coats and thin gloves, the kind that made people hurry home to whatever warmth they could afford. Emma Carter pressed her small hands deeper into the pockets of her second-hand jacket as she walked beside her grandmother Rose down Main Street. The stores were closing early. Most had been closing early for years now. Millbrook, Pennsylvania used to be something once. Back in the 1950s and 60s, the textile mills ran 3 shifts and families could buy houses on a single income. But the mills closed in the 80s and the town never recovered. Now, at the tail end of 2015, Millbrook was just another dot on the map that people drove past on their way to somewhere better. The population had shrunk from 15,000 to barely 3,000. Half the buildings on Main Street stood empty, their windows dark like missing teeth in an old smile. Emma was 8 years old, small for her age, with dark hair that hung past her shoulders and eyes that seemed too old for her face. She'd learned early that life wasn't fair, that Christmas didn't always mean presents, and that sometimes the people you loved most could disappear without warning. Her parents had died in a car accident 2 years ago, just after her 6th birthday. A drunk driver on Route 22, gone in an instant. Now it was just her and Grandma Rose, surviving in a 2-bedroom apartment above the old hardware store. Rose Carter was 63 but looked older. Her hands were rough from decades of work, her back permanently bent from years of leaning over factory machines, restaurant sinks, and motel beds she cleaned for $7 an hour. She worked 3 jobs now, trying to keep them afloat. The diner on weekday mornings, the motel on weekends, and evening shifts at the grocery store when they needed her. She never complained. Emma never heard her cry. But sometimes, late at night, Emma would wake up and hear her grandmother sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, just breathing, just existing, carrying weight no one should have to carry alone. They walked past Miller's Pharmacy, past the boarded-up movie theater, past the church with its cracked bell tower. A few people nodded at them. Rose returned the nods with a tired smile. Everyone knew everyone in Millbrook. There were no strangers here, just familiar faces wearing down together. "Grandma," Emma said quietly, "are we going to have a tree this year?" Rose's hand tightened around Emma's. "We'll see, baby. Maybe a small one." Emma nodded. She knew what that meant. She'd heard it before. "We'll see" meant no. Maybe meant probably not. But she didn't push. She'd learned not to ask for things that cost money. She'd learned to be grateful for what they had. A roof, heat most of the time, food even if it was canned soup and day-old bread from the bakery. They turned onto Birch Street, the long stretch that led toward their apartment. That's when Emma saw it. At the far end of the block, looming against the grey winter sky like a tombstone, stood the old St. Catherine's Orphanage. Emma had passed it 1,000 times, but always with Rose pulling her along quickly, always with warnings not to look too long, not to get curious, not to go near. The building had been abandoned since 1984, over 30 years ago. It was a massive 3-story structure built from dark stone, with tall windows that looked like empty eyes and a wrought iron fence that surrounded the property like a cage. No one went near St. Catherine, Bess. The town had tried to sell it multiple times, but no buyers ever came. There were rumors, the kind that small towns love to whisper. Some said the place was haunted. Others said terrible things had happened there before it closed. Emma had heard kids at school say that children died in the orphanage, that you could still hear them crying at night. She didn't believe in ghosts, but she believed in fear. And something about that building made even the adults afraid. Today, though, something was different. As they walked past, Emma noticed one of the ground floor windows was broken, not cracked, fully shattered.
Glass littered the snow beneath it, fresh and glittering. The opening was just big enough for someone small to climb through.
"Grandma,"
Emma started, but Rose was already pulling her along. "Don't even think about it," Rose said firmly. "That place is dangerous. Floors could collapse, ceilings could fall. You stay away from there, you hear me?" "Yes, ma'am," Emma replied. But she looked back over her shoulder. The broken window seemed to stare at her, an invitation, a dare. Something stirred in her chest. Curiosity, maybe, or loneliness. She'd spent so much of the last 2 years being good, being quiet, being no trouble. Maybe she was just tired of being invisible. They climbed the narrow stairs to their apartment. Inside, it smelled like coffee and lavender soap. The furniture was old but clean. Rose kept everything spotless, even when she was exhausted. The apartment was small, a living room with a couch that folded out into Emma's bed, a tiny kitchen, and Rose's bedroom barely big enough for a twin mattress and a dresser. Rose heated up some canned tomato soup and made grilled cheese sandwiches with the last of the bread. They ate quietly at the small table by the window. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Emma watched the flakes swirl and dance under the streetlights. "I have to work tonight," Rose said, breaking the silence. "Mr. Patterson called. Someone called in sick at the motel. I'll be back around midnight." Emma's heart sank, but she didn't let it show. Christmas Eve, and her grandmother had to work. "Okay," she said. "There's more soup in the cupboard if you get hungry. Keep the door locked. Don't answer it for anyone. And Emma—" Rose reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm sorry, baby. I know this isn't the Christmas you deserve." Emma squeezed back. "It's okay, Grandma. We're together. That's enough." Rose's eyes glistened, but she blinked it away. She stood, kissed the top of Emma's head and grabbed her coat. "I love you more than anything in this world. You know that, right?" "I know," Emma whispered. "I love you too." The door closed, the lock clicked, and Emma was alone. She washed the dishes, dried them, put them away. She tried to read a library book, but the words blurred together. She turned on the small television, but it was all Christmas specials full of happy families and too much noise. She turned it off. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty. She walked to the window and looked out at the street below. The snow was piling up now, covering cars, mailboxes, the whole world turning white and silent. Her breath fogged the glass. She traced a heart in the condensation, then wiped it away. Her eyes drifted down the street towards St. Catherine, ES. Even from here, she could see the dark silhouette rising against the night sky. The broken window was invisible in the darkness, but she knew it was there, waiting. Emma wasn't a rebellious kid. She followed rules, she did her homework, she never talked back. But something about tonight, about being alone on Christmas Eve in a town that felt like it was dying, about the weight of everything she'd lost, made her feel reckless. She put on her coat, her boots, her thin gloves. She unlocked the door and stepped into the hallway. Her heart pounded as she descended the stairs and pushed open the front door into the cold night air. The street was empty. Everyone was inside, safe, warm, together. Emma walked quickly, her boots crunching in the fresh snow. She told herself she was just going to look, just going to see what was inside. She'd be back in 20 minutes. Grandma Rose would never know. The fence around St. Catherine's was tall, but there was a section near the back where the iron bars had rusted and bent. Emma had seen older kids slip through there before. She squeezed through carefully, her coat catching on the metal. Then she was inside the grounds. Up close, the building was even more imposing. The stone walls were stained with decades of rain and neglect. Dead vines clung to the facade like veins. The front doors were chained shut, but Emma wasn't going for the front. She circled around to the side where she'd seen the broken window. There it was. Shattered glass sparkled in the snow. The window frame was empty, a dark mouth leading inside. Emma hesitated. Every instinct told her to turn back, but something stronger pulled her forward. She hoisted herself up onto the ledge, careful to avoid the remaining shards of glass. She swung her legs through and dropped down onto the floor inside. The air hit her immediately, cold and stale, like breathing in dust and time. She pulled out the small flashlight she'd grabbed from the apartment, clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a long hallway lined with doors. Emma moved slowly, her footsteps echoing on the old tile floor. The walls were painted a sickly green color, peeling in long strips. Doors hung open on broken hinges. She passed what looked like a classroom, desks still arranged in rows, a chalkboard with faded words she couldn't read. She passed a dormitory, rows of small metal bed frames rusting in the dark. It was sad, more than scary. This place had been full of children once. Kids with no parents, no homes, just each other and these cold walls. Emma wondered what had happened to them all when the orphanage closed. Where did they go? Did anyone want them? She climbed a staircase to the second floor. More hallways, more empty rooms. A bathroom with broken sinks and shattered mirrors. A room filled with old filing cabinets, papers spilled across the floor. She picked one up. It was a child's record, name, date of birth, reason for placement. She set it down gently, like it was something sacred. On the third floor, she found what must have been the administration wing. Larger offices, heavier furniture. One room had a massive wooden desk and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Emma ran her fingers along the spines of the books. Medical texts, legal volumes, religious studies. A photograph in a broken frame caught her eye. She picked it up carefully. It showed a family, a tall man in a suit, an elegant woman in a dress, and 2 teenage children. They stood in front of St. Catherine S., smiling. Written on the back in faded ink, "The Hargrove Family, 1976. Emma tucked the photo into her pocket without knowing why. Maybe because they looked happy. Maybe because she wanted to remember that happy families existed once, even here. She made her way back downstairs. She'd been inside maybe 30 minutes. She should go home. But as she passed the main hallway, she noticed something she'd missed before. A door beneath the staircase, partially hidden in shadow. It was heavy, metal, and unlike the others, it was closed. Emma approached it slowly. Her hand reached for the handle. It turned. The door opened with a groan that echoed through the empty building. Behind it, stairs led down into darkness. The basement. Every horror movie she'd ever seen told her not to go down. But Emma wasn't thinking about movies. She was thinking about how her whole life had been safe and careful and small. She was thinking about how she'd lost everything that mattered and survived anyway. She was thinking that maybe, just once, she wanted to see what was in the dark. She descended the stairs one at a time, her flashlight beam bouncing off brick walls. The temperature dropped with each step. At the bottom, she found herself in a large basement divided into sections. Old storage rooms. A kitchen area with industrial ovens and rusted pots. A laundry room with ancient washing machines. And at the far end, a heavy door marked boiler room. Emma walked toward it, her breath visible in the cold air. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open. The boiler room was larger than she expected, with a massive old furnace dominating the center like a sleeping giant. Pipes ran along the ceiling in every direction. The walls were bare brick, stained with age and moisture. She swept her flashlight around the room. In the far corner behind the furnace, she noticed something odd. The brick wall didn't quite line up. There was a seam, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. Emma approached slowly. She ran her hands along the bricks. They were loose, not crumbling, but deliberately placed to look like solid wall. Her heart began to race. She pushed gently. The section of wall shifted inward with a soft grinding sound. Behind it was a hidden room. Emma squeezed through the opening, her flashlight held high. The space was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with a low ceiling, and it was full. Stacks of wooden crates lined the walls, each one carefully sealed. Paintings leaned against every surface, wrapped in cloth and plastic. Sculptures stood on makeshift shelves, covered in dust, but clearly valuable. There were dozens of pieces, maybe over 100. The room was a hidden gallery, a secret vault.
Emma moved deeper inside, carefully navigating between the artwork. She unwrapped one of the paintings gently. It showed a woman in a garden, painted in soft blues and greens, the style impressionistic and beautiful. In the corner, a signature, Monet.
She didn't know much about art, but she knew that name. Even in Millbrook, even in third grade, she'd heard of Monet. These weren't just paintings, these were masterpieces. She unwrapped another, a portrait of a young man, dark and moody and intense. Another signature she recognized, Rembrandt. Her hands trembled. She moved to a crate and carefully pried open the top. Inside, nestled in protective padding, was a sculpture, a bronze figure, graceful and timeless. The label read, Rodin. Emma stepped back, her mind racing. Why was this here? Who hid it? How long had it been sealed away in this forgotten basement while the town above slowly died? She knew she should leave. She knew she should run and tell someone. But who would believe her? An 8-year-old girl from the poor side of town claiming she'd found millions of dollars in art in an abandoned building. They'd think she was lying. They'd think she was crazy. She needed proof. Emma chose the smallest painting, a piece about the size of a textbook. It showed a water lily pond, the colors still vibrant despite decades in darkness. She wrapped it carefully in her coat and held it close. Then she heard something. A sound from upstairs. Footsteps. Slow and deliberate. Emma's blood turned to ice. Someone else was in the building. She clicked off her flashlight and stood perfectly still in the darkness. The footsteps moved across the floor above her, back and forth searching. Then they stopped. Silence. Emma waited, barely breathing. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, she heard the footsteps retreat, growing fainter until they disappeared completely. She waited another 5 minutes, then carefully made her way out of the hidden room. She pushed the false wall back into place, making sure it looked undisturbed. Then she crept through the basement, up the stairs, and through the dark hallways toward the broken window. She climbed out into the snow, which was now ankle-deep. She ran through the grounds, squeezed through the fence, and didn't stop running until she was back on the street, back under the streetlights, back in the world of the living. She burst into the apartment, locked the door behind her, and stood in the small living room gasping for air. The painting was still clutched against her chest. She unwrapped it carefully and laid it on the coffee table. Even in the dim light of their apartment, it was beautiful. The brushstrokes were delicate, the colors luminous. In the corner, that signature again, Monet. Emma sat on the floor in front of it, staring. She didn't know what she'd found. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew her life had just changed. She knew that inside that abandoned orphanage, behind that false wall, someone had hidden a treasure. And now she was the only person in the world who knew where it was. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. Outside, church bells began to ring, calling the faithful to Christmas Eve Mass. Snow continued to fall on Millbrook, covering everything in white, making the whole town look clean and new and full of possibility. Emma picked up the painting carefully and carried it to her small closet. She hid it under a pile of blankets, somewhere safe, somewhere no one would look. Then she lay down on the fold-out couch, pulled the covers up to her chin, and stared at the ceiling. Her heart was still racing. Her mind was spinning with questions and possibilities, and the strange, terrifying feeling that she'd just stepped into something much bigger than herself. She heard the key in the lock. The door opened. Rose came in quietly, trying not to wake her, but Emma sat up. "Grandma," she said softly. Rose turned, surprised. "Baby, you should be sleeping. It's past midnight." "Merry Christmas," Emma said. Rose crossed the room and sat beside her, pulling her into a hug. She smelled like cleaning chemicals and cheap perfume from the motel. "Merry Christmas, sweet girl." They held each other in the darkness, and Emma, for the first time in 2 years, felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Because tomorrow she would show her grandmother what she'd found. Tomorrow everything would change. Tomorrow the painting hidden in her closet would open a door to a mystery 40 years in the making. But tonight, on Christmas Eve, In a forgotten town, in a small apartment, an 8-year-old girl and her grandmother sat together in the dark and held on to each other like they were all each other had in the world, because they were. Christmas morning came quiet and grey. Emma woke to the sound of Rose moving around the kitchen, the smell of instant coffee filling the small apartment. She lay still for a moment, wondering if last night had been a dream. Then she remembered the weight of the painting in her arms, the cold air of the basement, the rows of hidden masterpieces waiting in the dark. She sat up slowly. Rose was at the stove, scrambling eggs in the old cast-iron pan. She turned and smiled, but Emma could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Her grandmother had probably slept 3 hours, maybe 4. "Merry Christmas, baby," Rose said softly. "I made breakfast." "Grandma," Emma said, her voice small, "I need to show you something." Rose set down the spatula and turned fully. Something in Emma's tone made her go still. "What is it? Are you okay?" Emma stood and walked to the closet. She pulled out the painting from beneath the blankets, carried it carefully to the coffee table, and laid it down. The morning light from the window fell across it, making the colours glow. Rose approached slowly, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She stared down at the painting, her expression shifting from confusion to concern to something Emma couldn't quite read. "Where did you get this?" Rose asked quietly. Emma swallowed hard. "Last night, when you were at work, I went to St. Catherine S." Rose's face went pale. "Emma, I told you." "I know," Emma interrupted. "I'm sorry, but Grandma, there was a broken window and I just wanted to look and I found something. Something big." Rose sat down heavily on the couch, still staring at the painting. "Tell me everything." So Emma did. She told her about climbing through the window, exploring the empty building, finding the basement. She told her about the boiler room and the false wall and the hidden chamber filled with art. She told her about the crates and the sculptures and the paintings, dozens of them, all sealed away in the dark. When she finished, Rose was quiet for a long time. Finally, she reached out and touched the corner of the painting with one finger, barely grazing it, like it might disappear. "Do you know what this is?" Rose asked. Emma shook her head. "This signature," Rose pointed to the corner. "Monet, Claude Monet. He was one of the most famous painters who ever lived. If this is real—" She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "Is it worth a lot?" Emma asked. Rose let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Baby, if this is real, it's worth more money than you and I will see in our entire lives." They sat together in silence, both staring at the painting like it was a window into another world. Finally, Rose stood up. "Get dressed," she said. "We're going to the library." 20 minutes later, they were walking through the snow toward the Millbrook Public Library. It was one of the few buildings in town that still looked cared for, a small brick structure with white columns and tall windows. Emma had spent countless hours there after school while Rose worked, reading everything she could get her hands on. The library was closed for Christmas, but Rose had a key. She'd volunteered there for years, shelving books, helping with programs, anything to give back to the one place that had always been free and open to everyone. They let themselves in. The building was cold and dark. Rose turned on a few lights and led Emma to the computer stations in the back. She sat down and pulled up a web browser, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "What do we search?" Emma asked. "Let's start with what we know," Rose said. She typed slowly. "Monet water lilies, stolen paintings." The results flooded the screen, hundreds of articles. Emma leaned in closer as Rose clicked through them, scanning headlines and opening tabs. Then, Rose stopped. Her hand went to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. On the screen was an article from 1979 from the New York Times. The headline read, "Hargrove Collection Vanishes. $200 million art theft stuns nation." Emma read over her grandmother's shoulder. The article described how the Hargrove family, wealthy art collectors and philanthropists, had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Their entire collection, over 100 pieces of museum-quality art, had vanished with them. The FBI had investigated. Theories ranged from theft to murder to the family fleeing the country. But no bodies were ever found, no art ever recovered. The case went cold. Rose scrolled down. There was a photograph of the family. Emma's heart jumped. It was the same photo she'd found in the office upstairs. The tall man, the elegant woman, the two teenagers, the Hargrove family. "They ran St. Catherine S," Emma said quietly, pulling the photo from her pocket. "I found this last night." Rose took it, her hands shaking slightly. "Richard and Victoria Hargrove. I remember them. Not well. I was only in my 20s when they disappeared, but everyone knew them. They were the wealthiest family in Millbrook. They funded the hospital, the schools, the orphanage. When they vanished, it destroyed this town." She clicked on another article. This one listed some of the missing pieces: Monet's Water Lilies at Dawn, Rembrandt's Portrait of a Scholar, Degas' Dancer at Rest, Rodin's Eternal Spring. The list went on. Each piece was valued in the millions. Emma felt dizzy. "That's what's in the basement. All of it. The whole collection." Rose leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. "This doesn't make sense. If the Hargroves disappeared, if they were killed, who hid the art? And why in the orphanage basement?" "Maybe they hid it themselves," Emma said, "before whatever happened to them happened." Rose turned to look at her granddaughter, seeing something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Intelligence, insight. Emma had always been smart, but poverty and grief had made her quiet, small. Now, faced with a mystery, something was waking up inside her. Rose opened a new tab and searched. Hargrove Family, St. Catherine's Orphanage, Millbrook, Pennsylvania. More articles appeared. They painted a picture of a family devoted to helping children. Richard Hargrove had inherited wealth from his grandfather's steel fortune. Instead of living lavishly, he and his wife Victoria had poured millions into charitable work. They'd kept St. Catherine's running when it should have closed, personally funded improvements, even lived on the grounds in a private wing to be closer to the children they served. "They were good people," Rose said softly. "Everyone said so. When they disappeared, there were rumors about mob connections, about stolen art, about debts, but nobody ever proved anything." Emma pointed to the screen. "Look at the date. They disappeared in September of 1979. St. Catherine's closed in 1984. What happened in between?" Rose clicked through more articles. The orphanage stayed open for a while after they vanished. The state took it over, tried to keep it running, but funding dried up. There were investigations. Child Services eventually moved all the kids to other facilities. The building was abandoned. "And nobody thought to check the basement?" Emma asked. "Why would they? It was just an old orphanage. A tragedy, but not a crime scene. At least not one anyone knew about." Rose printed out several articles, the old library printer groaning and spitting out pages. She gathered them carefully, along with her notes. Then she looked at Emma seriously. "We need to go back," Rose said. Emma's eyes widened. "To St. Catherine SS? I need to see this with my own eyes. I need to know what we're dealing with before we tell anyone." They returned to the apartment long enough for Rose to grab a better flashlight, her camera, and a notebook. Emma changed into warmer clothes, layering sweaters under her coat. The temperature had dropped overnight, and the sky threatened more snow. They walked to St. Catherine's together in the bright light of Christmas afternoon. The streets were empty. Families were inside, opening presents, eating dinner, being together. Emma felt a pang of sadness, but pushed it away. Maybe this year, Christmas would give them something different, something bigger. The fence looked more menacing in daylight. The building loomed against the grey sky, all dark stone and broken windows. Rose found the gap in the fence and squeezed through, Emma right behind her. They approached the broken window. Rose went first, climbing through with surprising agility for her age. Emma followed. They stood together in the hallway, their breath visible in the cold air. "Show me," Rose said. Emma led the way. Through the hallways she'd navigated last night, past the classroom and the dormitory, down the main stairs to the basement door. Rose's flashlight was stronger than Emma's, throwing bold circles of light against the walls. They descended into the basement. Emma's heart pounded, remembering the footsteps she'd heard, the fear of being caught. But the basement was silent. Empty. They made their way to the boiler room. The door stood open, just as Emma had left it. Rose stepped inside, shining her light around the massive space. Emma led her to the far corner behind the furnace to the false wall. "Here," Emma said. Rose examined it closely, running her hands over the bricks. "Clever," she murmured. "You'd never notice unless you were looking." She pushed gently. The wall swung inward. They stepped into the hidden chamber together. Rose's flashlight swept across the room, illuminating stack after stack of paintings, crate after crate of treasures. She moved slowly, like she was walking through a sacred space. She approached the nearest painting and carefully pulled back the cloth covering. It was a Degas. A ballerina caught in motion, all grace and light. Rose's hand went to her throat. "Jesus," she whispered. "Emma, this is real. All of this is real." She moved to another painting, a Renoir, then a Cézanne. Each one was carefully wrapped and labeled with a small tag noting the artist, title, and year. Someone had catalogued everything, preserved it with care. Rose pulled out her camera and began taking photographs. Flash after flash illuminated the hidden room, capturing evidence of what they'd found. Emma stood in the corner, watching her grandmother work with an intensity she'd rarely seen. "Why would they hide it?" Emma asked again. "If the Hargroves owned all this, why not keep it in their house? Why seal it in a basement?" Rose lowered the camera, thinking. Protection, maybe. If they knew they were in danger, if someone was after them or the collection, hiding it would keep it safe. "But they never came back for it," Emma said quietly. "No," Rose agreed. "They never did." They spent over an hour in the hidden room. Rose photographed everything she could, made notes on which pieces she recognized, tried to count how many works were stored there. Emma helped, carefully lifting cloths, reading labels, being gentle with things more valuable than anything she'd ever touched. Finally, Rose stepped back. "We need to go. We need to think about what to do next." They carefully returned everything to how they'd found it, pushed the false wall back into place, and made their way out of the basement. As they climbed the stairs back to the main floor, Emma heard it again. Footsteps. This time they were real, unmistakable, coming from the second floor. Rose grabbed Emma's hand and pulled her back down the stairs. They pressed against the wall in the darkness, Rose's hand over Emma's mouth to muffle any sound. The footsteps moved overhead, slow and methodical. A door opened, closed. More footsteps. Then a voice, male, talking on a phone. "Yeah, I'm here now. Place is still sealed up. No sign of disturbance." A pause. "I check it every few weeks like you asked. Nobody ever comes here." Another pause. "I know what's at stake. I've kept this secret for 36 years. I'm not about to fail now." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. Rose held her tighter. The voice continued. "The window? I saw that yesterday. Probably kids. I'll board it up tomorrow." A longer pause. "No, I haven't forgotten. When the time comes, when someone finally asks the right questions, I'll know what to do." The footsteps moved toward the stairs. Rose pulled Emma deeper into the shadows. They held their breath as a man descended, his heavy boots echoing on the steps. He was older, maybe 70, with a thick coat and a flashlight of his own. He walked right past their hiding spot, close enough that Emma could smell cigarette smoke on his clothes. He continued toward the basement. They heard the door open, his footsteps descending. As soon as the sound faded, Rose pulled Emma toward the broken window. They ran quietly but quickly, climbing out into the daylight, crossing the grounds, squeezing through the fence. They didn't stop running until they were 2 blocks away, until the orphanage was out of sight behind them. They stopped in an alley, both gasping for air. "Who was that?" Emma asked between breaths. "I don't know," Rose said, her face pale. "But he's been watching that place for over 30 years. He knows about the collection." "Should we tell the police?" Rose hesitated. "And tell them what? That we broke into an abandoned building and found stolen art that disappeared 40 years ago?" That there's a man guarding it who might be involved in whatever happened to the Hargroves? But Grandma, I know, baby, I know. Rose pulled Emma close. We need help, real help, someone who can't be bought or scared off, someone who'll make sure this story gets told the right way. What happens next will turn this quiet Christmas discovery into a national sensation, reveal a truth that powerful people have killed to protect, and remind us why sometimes the smallest voices can shake the biggest secrets. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. They returned to the apartment as the sun began to set. Rose made them hot chocolate, and they sat at the kitchen table surrounded by printed articles and photographs. Emma watched her grandmother's face as she studied everything, seeing the wheels turning in her mind. There's a reporter, Rose said finally. Sarah Mitchell. She works for the Philadelphia Inquirer. She did a story about the mill closings a few years ago, really dug into why Millbrook was dying. She wasn't afraid to name names, to point fingers at the corporations and politicians who let it happen. You think she'll believe us? Emma asked. I think she'll want the story, Rose said. And if we can get her to believe it, she'll have the resources to investigate properly, to do this right. Rose pulled out her old laptop, the one she'd bought second-hand 5 years ago. She found Sarah Mitchell's contact information on the Inquirer's website and drafted an email. She wrote carefully, knowing how insane their story sounded. She attached 3 photographs: the Monet they'd brought home, the hidden room full of paintings, and the article about the Hargrove disappearance. The subject line read, Hargrove collection found in Millbrook Orphanage basement. Emma read over her shoulder. What if she doesn't respond? Then we'll try someone else, Rose said. We'll keep trying until someone listens. She hit send. They ate dinner in near silence, both lost in thought. Emma kept thinking about the man in the orphanage, his voice on the phone. Who was he reporting to? Who had asked him to guard the collection all these years? And what had he meant when he said he knew what was at stake? Rose washed dishes while Emma dried. It felt normal, this routine, but everything had changed. They both felt it. The world had gotten bigger in the last 24 hours, full of danger and possibility in equal measure. That night, Emma lay on the fold-out couch, unable to sleep. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the building settling, the wind against the windows. In her mind, she kept seeing the hidden room, all those masterpieces sealed away in darkness. How many children had lived in that orphanage over the years, never knowing that just beneath their feet lay a fortune? How many people had walked past that boiler room, that false wall, never guessing what was hidden there? Around 11 o'clock, Rose's laptop chimed. Emma sat up. Rose emerged from her bedroom, still dressed, like she'd been waiting. She opened the email. Her eyes widened. She responded, Rose said. Sarah Mitchell, she wants to meet us tomorrow afternoon. Emma felt a surge of adrenaline. What did she say? Rose read from the screen. Your email is either the biggest hoax I've ever seen or the story of my career. I'll be in Millbrook tomorrow by 2 p.m. Name a place. Come with proof. If this is real, we need to move fast and carefully. People have died for less than what you're describing. Rose and Emma looked at each other. The room felt smaller suddenly, the weight of what they'd started pressing down on them. Are we doing the right thing? Emma asked quietly. Rose crossed the room and sat beside her granddaughter on the couch. She took Emma's hands in her own, rough and warm. Baby, I've spent my whole life being invisible, working jobs where nobody knows my name, living in a town everybody forgot, and I've watched you grow up the same way, quiet and small, and trying not to ask for too much. Her voice caught. But you found something that matters, something that belonged to people who cared about this town, who tried to help, and I think they'd want the truth to come out. I think they'd want their story told. But it's dangerous, Emma said. That man, whoever he is— I know, Rose interrupted, but some things are worth the risk, and maybe, just maybe, this is our chance to be more than invisible, to matter. Emma thought about that. About her parents who'd died on a random Tuesday, gone without warning, leaving barely a ripple in the world. About her grandmother, who worked 3 jobs and never complained but was slowly disappearing under the weight of just surviving. About herself, 8 years old and already learning to take up less space, to want less, to be less. Maybe Rose was right. Maybe this was their chance to be seen. "Okay," Emma said. "Let's do it." The next morning, they prepared. Rose called in sick to all 3 of her jobs, something she'd never done. Emma helped her organize all their evidence. The photographs, the printed articles, the painting they'd taken, the photo of the Hargrove family. They packed everything into a canvas tote bag and waited. At 1:30, they walked to the address they'd given Sarah Mitchell, Rosie's Diner on Main Street. It was the only restaurant in Millbrook that stayed open during the holidays. They ordered coffee and sat in a corner booth, the tote bag on the seat between them. At exactly 2 p.m., a woman walked through the door. She was in her 40s, with short dark hair and sharp eyes that scanned the room before landing on Rose and Emma. She wore jeans, boots, and a heavy jacket. She walked over to their booth. "Rose Carter?" she asked. Rose nodded. "Thank you for coming." Sarah slid into the booth across from them. She didn't smile, didn't make small talk. She looked at Emma with something like curiosity, then back at Rose. "Show me," she said simply. Rose pulled out the painting first, unwrapped it carefully, and laid it on the table. Sarah leaned forward, her expression unreadable. She pulled out her phone and took several photos from different angles. Then she opened a browser and started searching, comparing the painting to images online. After 5 minutes, she looked up. "If this is a forgery, it's the best I've ever seen. But I'm not an expert. We'll need authentication." "There's more," Emma said quietly. Rose pulled out the photographs of the hidden room. Sarah's eyes widened slightly as she flipped through them. Then the articles about the Hargrove disappearance, the family photo, everything. Sarah set down the photos and leaned back in the booth. She studied Rose and Emma for a long moment. "Do you understand what you're sitting on?" she asked. "We think so," Rose said. "This is bigger than stolen art. The Hargrove case is one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in Pennsylvania history. If what you're saying is true, if that entire collection is in that orphanage, this will explode. National news, federal investigation, and anyone who's been hiding this for 40 years will do anything to keep it hidden." "We know," Emma said. "We heard someone. In the orphanage. A man. He was on the phone. He said he'd been keeping it secret for 36 years. Sarah's expression sharpened. "Tell me everything." So they did. Emma described Christmas Eve, the broken window, finding the hidden room. Rose explained their research at the library, the return visit to photograph everything, hearing the man on the phone. Sarah listened without interrupting, taking notes on her phone. When they finished, Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she made a decision. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm calling my editor. We're running this story, but we need to do it smart. First, I need to get into that basement myself, see it with my own eyes. Can you take me there?" Rose hesitated. "It's not safe. If that man comes back—" "That's a risk I'm willing to take," Sarah said. "But I understand if you're not. You can give me directions. I'll go alone." Emma and Rose looked at each other. A silent conversation passed between them. Then Emma spoke. "We'll take you," she said. "But we go now, before it gets dark." Sarah nodded. She threw money on the table for the coffee and stood. "Let's go." They walked to St. Catherine's together, 3 figures moving through the snowy streets. Sarah had a professional camera now, better than Rose's, and a small duffel bag with equipment. As they approached the orphanage, Sarah stopped and took in the building. "Creepy," she murmured. "Perfect place to hide secrets." They entered through the broken window, Sarah moving with the confidence of someone used to going where she wasn't supposed to be. Emma led the way again, the route familiar now, down to the basement, through the cold corridors, into the boiler room. When they pushed open the false wall and Sarah saw the hidden chamber, she let out a low whistle. "Holy hell," she breathed. She spent over an hour documenting everything. Photographs from every angle, video footage. She examined the labels on the crates, photographed the signatures on the paintings. She was thorough, methodical, professional. Finally, she stepped back. This is real, all of it. Do you have any idea what the total value is? Rose shook her head. Based on auction records and what I'm seeing here, we're talking at least $265 million, maybe more. This is one of the most significant art discoveries in decades. Emma felt dizzy. $265 million. She couldn't even picture that much money. They were about to leave when Sarah noticed something. In the corner, partially hidden behind a crate, was a leather satchel. She pulled it out carefully and opened it. Inside were documents, letters, legal papers, and a journal. Sarah handed the journal to Rose. I think you should read this. Rose opened it carefully. The handwriting was elegant, feminine. The first page was dated September 8th, 1979. It read, If you're reading this, then Victoria and I are dead. I pray that's not the case, that we've simply been cautious and paranoid. But I fear the worst. They know. They know what we discovered, what we plan to expose, and men with this much to lose are capable of anything. Rose's hands trembled as she turned the page. The journal continued. We moved the collection to the orphanage 3 days ago. It seemed fitting. These treasures were meant to help people, to inspire, to bring beauty into a broken world. If we can't protect them, at least we can hide them where they might one day be found by someone who cares more about truth than money. Emma read over her grandmother's shoulder, her heart pounding. The journal went on to explain everything. How Richard and Victoria had discovered that several pieces in their collection had been stolen from Jewish families during World War II. How they'd tried to return the art to the rightful owners or their descendants. How they'd been threatened by powerful collectors who'd purchased the pieces in good faith and didn't want to give them up. How the threats had escalated to violence. We've gone to the authorities, Richard had written, but these men have connections at every level. Police, judges, politicians. We're not safe. The children at St. Catherine's aren't safe, so we're hiding the collection and preparing to disappear. If we survive, we'll reclaim it and continue the fight. If we don't, I pray someone finds this journal and finishes what we started. Return these pieces to their rightful owners. Tell our story. Don't let them win. The final entry was dated September 14th, 1979, 6 days before the Hargroves were last seen alive. Rose closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. They were murdered, she whispered, for trying to do the right thing. Sarah was already on her phone, recording audio notes, her voice tight with urgency. This changes everything. This isn't just about stolen art. This is about restitution, justice, and murder. They gathered everything, the journal, the documents, the photographs, and carefully made their way out of the orphanage. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the snow. As they emerged from the building, Emma stopped. Look! Parked on the street, partially hidden behind a snowbank, was a black sedan. Someone was inside, watching. Sarah saw it too. Move, now, don't run, just walk normally. They walked toward Main Street, the sedan following at a distance. Sarah pulled out her phone and made a call. Jeff, it's Mitchell. I need you to do exactly what I say. I'm sending you files right now, photos, video, documents. Upload them to the cloud immediately. If anything happens to me, if I don't check in within 2 hours, publish everything. Everything. She paused. I'm serious. This is the Hargrove case. I've found the collection, and I think I'm being followed. She ended the call and looked at Rose and Emma. You two need to go somewhere safe, not your apartment, somewhere public, somewhere with people. The church, Rose said. St. Michael S. evening service is at 6. It'll be full. They hurried toward the church, the sedan still trailing behind. As they reached the steps, Sarah turned. Go inside. Stay there until I call you. I'm going to the police station, going to make sure this goes public before anyone can stop it. What about you? Emma asked. Sarah smiled grimly. I've been doing this for 20 years, kid. I know how to stay safe. Rose grabbed Sarah's arm. Thank you for believing us, for caring. Sarah nodded. Thank you for being brave enough to look in the dark. Now go. They climbed the steps into St. Michael's. The church was warm and filled with soft organ music. People were gathering for evening service, families dressed in their Sunday best. Rose and Emma slipped into a back pew and sat close together. Emma looked up at her grandmother. What now? Rose took her hand. Now we pray that Sarah gets that story out before someone tries to stop her. And we hope that doing the right thing was worth the risk. They sat in silence as the church filled around them. Outside, through the stained glass windows, they could see snow beginning to fall again. The black sedan was still parked across the street, waiting. But inside, surrounded by candles and prayers and people they'd known their whole lives, Emma felt something unexpected. Not fear, not anymore. She felt like they'd done something that mattered, like they'd given voice to people who'd been silenced, like they'd started something that couldn't be stopped. The service began. Hymns rose toward the vaulted ceiling, and Emma Carter, 8 years old and small for her age, held her grandmother's hand and believed, maybe for the first time, that the world could change, that truth could win, that even the smallest voice could shake the biggest secrets. And that tomorrow, when Sarah Mitchell's story hit the news, nothing in Millbrook would ever be the same again. The story broke at 6:30 the next morning. Rose's phone started ringing before the sun came up. Emma woke to the sound of her grandmother's voice, tense and careful, answering questions. They'd spent the night at their neighbor's apartment, a widow named Mrs. Chen, who asked no questions when Rose knocked on her door at 9 p.m., asking for a place to sleep. Rose ended the call and looked at Emma. Her face was pale but determined. That was Sarah Mitchell. The story's live, front page of the Inquirer's website. She says it's already being picked up by national outlets. Emma sat up on the couch where she'd slept. What does that mean? It means the world knows, Rose said quietly. About the Hargroves, about the collection, about us. She opened her laptop and turned it so Emma could see. There, filling the screen, was Sarah's article. The headline read, Missing Hargrove Art Collection Found in Pennsylvania Orphanage After 40 Years. Journal Reveals Murder and Conspiracy. Below it was a photograph of the hidden room, paintings visible in the flashlight beam, and beneath that, a photo of Emma and Rose, taken at the diner. The caption identified them as the discoverers. Emma's stomach twisted. Everyone's going to know it was us. Yes, Rose said. They are. By 8 a.m., there were news vans parked outside their apartment building. Reporters knocked on doors. Cameras pointed at windows. Rose kept the curtains drawn at Mrs. Chen's place and tried to think. Her phone rang again. An unknown number. She answered cautiously. Mrs. Carter, this is Special Agent Marcus Webb with the FBI Art Crime Team. I'm calling about the Hargrove collection. We need to speak with you as soon as possible. Rose's hand tightened on the phone. Are we in trouble? No, ma'am, you're not. But we need your help, and we need to ensure your safety. Where are you right now? Rose hesitated. Every instinct told her not to trust anyone, but they were in over their heads. They needed help from someone with real authority. We're at a friend's apartment, in Millbrook. Good. Stay there. Don't speak to any reporters. I'm sending agents to your location. They'll be there within the hour. They'll identify themselves properly. Don't open the door for anyone else. The line went dead. Emma looked at her grandmother. Was that really the FBI? I don't know, baby. I hope so. They waited. Mrs. Chen made them breakfast, her weathered face full of concern. She'd lived in Millbrook for 40 years, had known Rose since Emma was born. She didn't ask what was happening. She just set plates of eggs and toast in front of them and squeezed Rose's shoulder. Whatever this is, Mrs. Chen said softly, you did something good. I can see it in your face. 53 minutes later, there was a knock. 3 sharp raps. Rose looked through the peephole. 2 people stood in the hallway, a man and a woman, both in dark suits. They held up badges to the peephole. Rose opened the door. Mrs. Carter? I'm Special Agent Webb. This is Special Agent Rodriguez. May we come in?
They entered, and Mrs. Chen quietly retreated to her bedroom. Agent Webb was in his 50s, with grey at his temples and eyes that missed nothing. Agent Rodriguez was younger, maybe 35, with a kind face and a calm demeanor. They sat in Mrs. Chen's small living room. Webb pulled out a tablet and opened a file. First, let me be clear. You and your granddaughter are not suspects in any crime. What you found, how you found it, that's not our concern right now. What matters is protecting that collection and getting to the truth about what happened to the Hargrove family.
Are we in danger? Rose asked. Webb and Rodriguez exchanged a glance. Potentially, Rodriguez said gently. The article mentioned you by name. And if there are people who've been hiding this for 40 years, they're not going to be happy it's been exposed. The man, Emma said suddenly, the one we heard in the orphanage. He said he'd been keeping the secret for 36 years. He was talking to someone on the phone. Webb leaned forward. Can you describe his voice, his appearance? Emma closed her eyes, remembering. He was old, maybe 70, heavy boots. He smoked cigarettes, I could smell it. His voice was rough, like he'd been a smoker for a long time. And what exactly did he say? Rodriguez asked, taking notes. Emma repeated what she remembered, about checking the building, about keeping the secret, about knowing what to do when someone asked the right questions. Webb's jaw tightened. He's been guarding it. For someone. The question is who? He tapped on his tablet and pulled up a photo. Do you recognize this man? It was a police mugshot from the 1970s. A man in his 30s, hard-looking, with cold eyes. Rose shook her head. No, should I? His name was Vincent Mallory. He was a hired enforcer for several wealthy collectors back in the 70s and 80s. He went to prison in 83 for assault. Got out in 91. He's been living quietly in central Pennsylvania ever since. He'd be 72 now. You think he killed the Hargroves? Emma asked. We think he might know who did, Webb said. We've had agents looking for him since the story broke. His house is empty. He's in the wind. The room fell silent. Emma felt cold despite the warmth of the apartment. Rodriguez spoke gently. We're going to keep you safe. We've arranged for protection. You'll have agents with you at all times until we know what we're dealing with. We can't afford protection, Rose said quietly. You're not paying for it, Webb said. This is a federal investigation now. You're material witnesses. It's our job to protect you. Over the next 2 days, their lives became unrecognizable. They returned to their apartment with FBI escorts. Agents stood outside their door 24 hours a day. More agents went to St. Catherine ES, documented everything, and began the process of recovering and cataloging the collection. Art experts flew in from New York, Boston, and Washington, D.C. Each piece was photographed, examined, and authenticated. The news coverage was relentless. Every major network ran stories. The Hargrove case, cold for 40 years, was suddenly the biggest story in the country. And then the calls started. Lawyers, lots of lawyers. The first came from the Hargrove estate. Richard and Victoria's nephew, a man named Bradley Hargrove who lived in Connecticut, claimed he was the rightful heir to the collection. He'd never visited Millbrook, never tried to find his missing aunt and uncle, but now he wanted what they'd left behind. The second came from the Archdiocese of Pennsylvania. The Catholic Church owned the land where St. Catherine's stood. Their lawyers argued that anything found on church property belonged to the church. The third came from Continental Insurance Group. They'd paid out claims on the missing art back in 1980. They argued they now owned the collection since they'd already compensated the original owners. And then came the most important calls. From lawyers representing Jewish families whose ancestors had owned some of the pieces before World War II. They had documentation proving the art had been stolen by Nazis, sold on the black market, and eventually ended up in various collections, including the Hargroves. These families weren't asking for money. They were asking for what had always belonged to them. Pieces of their history, their heritage, their murdered relatives' legacies. Rose and Emma sat in a conference room at a law office in Philadelphia, surrounded by people in expensive suits arguing about millions of dollars. It was overwhelming, suffocating. Finally, Rose stood up. "Stop!" she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but something in it made everyone go quiet. "My granddaughter and I didn't find this collection so people could fight over money. We found it because a little girl was curious and brave. We reported it because it was the right thing to do. And now you're all sitting here like vultures, picking at something that represents people's lives." She pulled out the journal, Richard Hargrove's journal, and placed it on the table. "These people died trying to return stolen art to its rightful owners. They were murdered for it. And you want to honor their memory by fighting over who gets paid. That's not why we came forward. That's not why this matters." Bradley Hargrove's lawyer, a sharp-faced woman in a grey suit, leaned forward. "With all due respect, Mrs. Carter, you don't have a legal claim to this collection. You have no say in how it's distributed." "Maybe not," Rose said. "But I have a voice, and so does my granddaughter, and we're going to use it." Agent Webb, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner, spoke up. "Actually, under federal law, finders of historical artifacts of this significance may be entitled to compensation. It's not uncommon in cases like this." Emma looked up sharply. "What does that mean?" Rodriguez, sitting next to Webb, explained gently. "It means that because you found the collection and reported it to authorities, you may be entitled to a finder's fee, usually a percentage of the total value." "How much?" Rose asked warily. "Typically between 5 and 15%, Webb said. "In this case, given the circumstances and the value, possibly more." Emma did the math in her head. 5% of $265 million was over $13 million. 15% was almost $40 million. She felt like she couldn't breathe. The lawyers immediately erupted in arguments. The Hargrove estate's lawyer claimed any finder's fee would come from Bradley's inheritance. The insurance lawyers argued they'd already paid and shouldn't have to pay again. The church's lawyers said the collection was found on their property. Rose grabbed Emma's hand and walked out of the conference room. They stood in the hallway, both shaking. "I don't want this," Emma whispered. "I don't want people fighting. I just wanted to find something beautiful." Rose knelt down in front of her granddaughter. "I know, baby, but sometimes doing the right thing gets complicated. Doesn't mean it wasn't worth doing." A woman approached them in the hallway. She was elderly, maybe 80, with white hair and kind eyes. She wore a simple dress and carried a worn leather bag. "Excuse me," she said with a slight accent. "Are you Rose and Emma Carter?" Rose stood, protective. "Yes. Who are you?" "My name is Ruth Goldstein. My grandmother owned one of the paintings in that collection, a Degas. It was stolen from her home in Vienna in 1938 when she fled the Nazis. She never saw it again. She died believing it was lost forever." Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "I read the article. I saw what you found. I saw the journal entries about returning stolen art. I came to say thank you." Emma felt her throat tighten. "You're not angry? About how long it took?" Ruth shook her head. "How could I be angry with a child who had the courage to look in the dark, with a grandmother who taught her granddaughter to do what's right even when it's hard?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph. It showed a young woman in 1930s clothing standing in front of a painting, the Degas. "This is my grandmother, Sarah. She loved art. She and her family collected beautiful things not because they were expensive, but because they believed beauty made the world better." Ruth's voice cracked. "When the Nazis came, they took everything. Her home, her possessions, her freedom. She escaped with just this photograph. She kept it until she died, hoping somehow, someday, her painting would be found." She handed the photograph to Emma. "Because of you, I can reclaim what was stolen from my family. Not for money, but for memory, for justice, for my grandmother's name." Emma looked at the photograph, at the woman who'd lost everything, and felt something shift inside her. This wasn't about finder's fees or legal battles. It was about giving people back pieces of themselves. More people came over the following days, descendants of other families whose art had been stolen. a man whose grandfather had owned the Rembrandt, a woman whose great-aunt had cherished the Monet. Each one brought stories, photographs, documentation, and each one thanked Emma and Rose for doing what the Hargroves had died trying to do. But not everyone was grateful. One evening, as Rose walked Emma home from school under FBI escort, a car pulled up alongside them. The window rolled down. "You've made a big mistake," a man's voice said from the shadows inside. Emma couldn't see his face. That collection wasn't meant to be found. People who dig where they shouldn't end up buried. The FBI agents immediately stepped between them and the car. One agent drew his weapon. The car sped off before they could get the license plate. That night, Rose held Emma tight in their apartment. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I let you go to that orphanage. I'm sorry this got so big and scary." "You didn't let me," Emma said. "I chose to go, and I'd choose it again." "Why?" Rose asked, pulling back to look at her granddaughter. "Because Mum and Dad died, and nobody even noticed. They were just two more people in a forgotten town. Their funeral was small. Their graves are plain. It's like they barely existed." Emma's voice was steady despite her tears. "But the Hargroves, they existed. They cared about things. They died for something that mattered. And those families who lost their art, they existed too. By finding this, by telling their stories, we made them matter again." Rose held her granddaughter and cried. Not from fear, but from pride, from the realization that this small, quiet child had become someone brave and thoughtful and impossibly strong. The legal battles dragged on for weeks. Every day brought new complications, new claimants, new arguments. The FBI investigation expanded. They confirmed that Vincent Mallory had been at St. Catherine's the night Emma and Rose returned with Sarah Mitchell. Security footage from a nearby business showed his car. They also confirmed something else. Phone records showed Mallory had made a call that night to a number registered to a shell corporation. That corporation was owned by a man named Robert Sinclair, one of the wealthiest art collectors on the East Coast. Sinclair had been at parties with the Hargroves in the 1970s. He'd tried to buy pieces from their collection multiple times, and according to Richard Hargrove's journal, Sinclair was one of the collectors who'd threatened them when they tried to return stolen art. The FBI brought Sinclair in for questioning. His lawyers surrounded him like a wall, but the evidence was mounting. Financial records showed he'd been paying Mallory for decades. For what, his lawyers wouldn't say, but the implication was clear. 1 month after the story broke, Emma and Rose were called to testify before a grand jury in Philadelphia. They sat in a stark room and told their story to a panel of strangers. Emma described Christmas Eve, the broken window, the hidden room. Rose described the journal, the threats, their fear. When they finished, the jury foreman, an older black woman with gentle eyes, spoke directly to Emma. "Young lady, what you did took tremendous courage. I want you to know that because of you, we're going to get justice for the Hargrove family, and for all the families whose art was stolen. Thank you." 2 days later, Robert Sinclair was arrested. The charges included conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and interstate transportation of stolen property. Vincent Mallory was found hiding in West Virginia and arrested on similar charges. The news sent shockwaves through the art world. One of its most prominent collectors, a man who sat on museum boards and donated millions to cultural institutions, had allegedly been involved in the murder of the Hargrove family and the cover-up that followed. As the criminal case moved forward, the civil cases began to resolve. The federal judge overseeing the distribution of the collection made several key rulings. First, all pieces with documented proof of Nazi theft would be returned to the families of the original owners. No compensation required. Justice, the judge said, was not for sale. Second, the remaining pieces that had been legitimately owned by the Hargroves would be sold at auction. The proceeds would be divided among several parties. Third, and most importantly, Rose and Emma Carter would receive a finder's fee of 20% of the total auction proceeds, not from the pieces being returned to families, the judge emphasized, but from the legitimate Hargrove estate. The math was staggering. Of the $265 million collection, about $90 million worth of art was being returned to families. The remaining $175 million would go to auction. 20% of that was $35 million. Rose nearly fainted when their lawyer explained it to her. Emma just stared, unable to process numbers that large. "What do we do with it?" Emma asked quietly. Their lawyer, a kind woman named Patricia Chen, who'd taken their case pro bono, smiled. "That's up to you. But there's something else you should know." She pulled out another document. The Hargrove family's will was filed with the court back in 1979, just before they disappeared. They left instructions that if anything happened to them, their estate should be used to establish a foundation to help orphans and foster children. Rose read the will carefully. Richard and Victoria had been specific. They wanted their wealth to help kids who had nothing, who'd been forgotten by the world, who needed someone to believe in them. "Bradley Hargrove has contested this," Patricia said. "He claims as the surviving family member he should inherit, but the judge is leaning toward honoring the Hargroves' wishes." Emma looked at her grandmother. "What about our finder's fee? Can we use it however we want?" Patricia nodded. "Yes, that money is yours, free and clear." Emma thought for a long moment. Then she said something that didn't surprise Rose at all. "I think we should put it in the foundation, the Hargrove Foundation. Use it to help kids like the ones who lived at St. Catherine S. Kids who need homes and hope and someone to care." Rose's eyes filled with tears. "Baby, that's $35 million. That could change our lives. We could buy a house, travel, never worry about money again." "We could keep some," Emma said. "Enough to be okay. But the rest should help people. That's what the Hargroves would want. That's why they hid the art in the orphanage in the first place." Patricia looked between them. "Are you sure? You should take time to think about this." "We're sure," Rose said, taking Emma's hand. "My granddaughter is wise beyond her years. We'll keep enough to live comfortably. The rest goes to the foundation." Over the next few months, details were finalized. Rose and Emma kept $5 million, more money than they'd ever dreamed of, enough to buy a small house, secure Emma's education, and let Rose finally retire from her 3 jobs. The remaining $30 million went to establish the Hargrove Carter Foundation. The name was Emma's idea, a way to honor both the people who'd hidden the collection and the people who'd found it. Bradley Hargrove fought the will for a while but eventually gave up when the judge ruled against him. He received a smaller inheritance from other Hargrove assets, enough to satisfy him even if it didn't make him happy. The art auctions took place over several weeks at major auction houses in New York and London. The remaining Hargrove collection brought in $182 million, even more than estimated. After legal fees and expenses, the foundation received over $140 million. Combined with Emma and Rose's donation, the Hargrove Carter Foundation launched with $170 million in assets. The first thing they did was buy St. Catherine S. The church sold it gladly, happy to be rid of a building that had caused them nothing but legal headaches. The foundation began renovations, planning to turn it into a group home and education center for foster children. The hidden room where Emma had found the art was preserved exactly as it was. It became a museum, telling the story of the Hargrove family, their collection, and the 8-year-old girl who'd had the courage to look in the dark. But not everything was celebration. The trial of Robert Sinclair and Vincent Mallory began in early spring. Emma and Rose were called to testify. Sitting in that courtroom, facing the men who'd threatened them, who'd possibly murdered the Hargroves, was terrifying. But Emma walked to the witness stand with her head high. She told her story clearly, calmly. When Sinclair's lawyer tried to intimidate her with aggressive questions, she didn't back down. "You broke into private property," the lawyer said accusingly. "You stole a painting. How are you any different from a thief?" Emma looked directly at the jury. "I was 8 years old and curious. I found something beautiful that had been hidden for 40 years, and when I realized what it was, I didn't keep it. I didn't try to sell it. I told people who could help. That's not stealing. That's honesty." The jury nodded. Several smiled. The prosecution's case was strong. Mallory, facing a life sentence, had agreed to testify against Sinclair. He admitted he'd been hired to handle the Hargrove problem back in 1979. He'd made it look like they'd disappeared voluntarily, had hidden their bodies where they'd never be found. He'd been paid to guard the orphanage for decades to make sure no one found the collection. When Emma and Rose had discovered it, he'd reported to Sinclair immediately. Sinclair had told him to watch them, to scare them if necessary. The threatening drive-by had been Mallory's idea. Sinclair's lawyers claimed he'd never authorized threats, but phone records proved they'd been in contact. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 2 days. They found both men guilty on all counts. Robert Sinclair was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. Vincent Mallory got 40 years. Neither man would likely ever be free again. When the verdict was read, Rose grabbed Emma's hand and squeezed tight. In the gallery behind them sat Ruth Goldstein and other family members who'd reclaimed their stolen art. They'd waited decades for justice. Now, finally, they had it. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Sarah Mitchell was there, still covering the story she'd broken. She pushed through the crowd to reach Rose and Emma. "How do you feel?" she asked. Rose looked tired but at peace. "Like we did what needed to be done. Like maybe the Hargroves can rest now." "And you, Emma?" Sarah asked. "Do you regret going into that orphanage?" Emma thought about everything that had happened. The fear, the threats, the legal battles, the overwhelming attention. Then she thought about Ruth Goldstein holding her grandmother's photograph. About the foundation that would help thousands of kids. About justice finally served after 40 years. "No," she said simply. "I'd do it again." The crowd around them erupted in applause. Not everyone had supported them through this ordeal. Some people in Millbrook had been resentful of the attention, of outsiders flooding their town, of change. But many more had been proud. Proud that their forgotten town had been home to something important. Proud that one of their own had been brave enough to seek the truth. As the cameras flashed and questions flew, Emma looked up at her grandmother. Rose looked down at her, and they shared a smile. They'd started this journey on Christmas Eve, a lonely little girl and her exhausted grandmother barely scraping by. Now they stood together, survivors, fighters, heroes in a story that would be told for generations. But as they walked away from the courthouse, through the crowd, toward the car that would take them home to Millbrook, Emma wasn't thinking about being a hero. She was thinking about the kids who would live at the new St. Catherine S., the ones who would have a chance because she'd climbed through a broken window on a snowy night. She was thinking about how sometimes the smallest acts of courage can change everything. And she was thinking that maybe, just maybe, being invisible wasn't the worst thing, because when you're invisible, people don't expect much, and when you do something extraordinary, it shines even brighter. The car pulled away from the courthouse. In the rearview mirror, Emma watched the crowd fade. Ahead of them, the road stretched toward home, toward Millbrook, toward a future that looked nothing like the past. And beside her, holding her hand, was the woman who'd taught her that doing the right thing was always worth it, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. Rose squeezed Emma's hand. "I love you, baby." "I love you too, Grandma." They rode in comfortable silence, two ordinary people who'd done something extraordinary, heading home to a town that would never forget what they'd found in the dark. Spring arrived in Millbrook like a promise kept. The snow melted, revealing streets that looked somehow different, cleaner, more hopeful. New businesses had started opening on Main Street, a coffee shop, a bookstore, a small gallery that sold work by local artists. The news coverage had brought tourists, people curious about the town where an 8-year-old girl had found a fortune in an abandoned orphanage. Emma stood at the window of their new home, watching the morning sun paint the sky orange and pink. The house was modest by rich people's standards, but felt like a palace to her. 3 bedrooms, a real kitchen with new appliances, a backyard with actual grass. Rose had chosen it carefully, something comfortable but not ostentatious. They were still the same people, she'd said, just with fewer worries. "Emma, breakfast is ready," Rose called from downstairs. Emma bounded down the steps, her feet light on carpet that didn't have stains or worn patches. In the kitchen, Rose had made pancakes, real ones from scratch, not the frozen kind they used to share. They ate together at a table that didn't wobble, in chairs that matched, surrounded by the quiet comfort of security. But Emma noticed her grandmother seemed distracted, nervous even. "What's wrong?" Emma asked. Rose set down her fork. "Nothing's wrong, baby. It's just a big day. The dedication ceremony for St. Catherine S. Are you ready?" Emma nodded. Today, the renovated orphanage would officially reopen as the Hargrove Carter Foundation's first group home and education center. 15 foster children, aged 8 to 17, would be moving in. Kids who'd been bouncing between temporary placements, kids who needed stability, kids who needed someone to believe they mattered. Kids like Emma had been, like Emma still was in all the ways that counted. They dressed carefully. Rose wore a simple blue dress, the nicest thing she owned. Emma wore a white dress with yellow flowers that Rose had bought special for today. As Rose braided Emma's hair, she caught her granddaughter's eyes in the mirror. "You know your life is going to change again after today," Rose said softly. "People are going to treat you different. Some will think you're special, blessed. Others will be jealous or resentful. You can't control how they see you. You can only control who you are." "Who am I?" Emma asked quietly. Rose smiled. "You're the girl who was brave enough to climb through a broken window, who was honest enough to tell the truth even when it was scary, who was generous enough to give away a fortune to help people she'd never met. That's who you are. Don't ever forget it." Emma nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. They drove to St. Catherine's in Rose's new car, nothing fancy, just a reliable Honda sedan that started every time and had heat that actually worked. As they approached the orphanage, Emma's breath caught. The building had been transformed. The dark stone had been cleaned until it almost glowed. New windows sparkled in the morning sun. The wrought iron fence had been repaired and painted. Flowers bloomed in beds that had been nothing but weeds 6 months ago. A sign hung above the entrance in elegant letters, "Hargrove Carter Foundation, building hope since 2016. The parking lot was full. News vans lined the street. A small stage had been erected near the entrance, decorated with ribbons and flowers. Hundreds of people had gathered, some in folding chairs, others standing in clusters. Agent Webb and Agent Rodriguez were there, both in civilian clothes now, smiling as they spotted Emma and Rose. Sarah Mitchell waved from near the stage, her camera crew setting up beside her. Patricia Chen, their lawyer, stood talking with Foundation board members they'd carefully selected over the past months. And there, in the front row of chairs, sat Ruth Goldstein and other descendants of families who'd reclaimed their stolen art. They'd all come to witness this moment, to see something good rise from so much pain. As Rose and Emma walked toward the stage, people began to applaud. It started small, then grew, waves of clapping that made Emma's cheeks burn. She wasn't used to this attention. Part of her wanted to run, to hide, to be invisible again. But Rose's hand in hers kept her steady. They climbed the stage. The mayor of Millbrook was there, the same man who'd barely acknowledged them 6 months ago. Now he smiled broadly, eager to be associated with their success. The director of Pennsylvania's foster care system stood beside him, along with representatives from various charitable organizations. But the person who stepped forward to greet them was someone Emma hadn't expected. Margaret Pierce, an elderly woman with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Emma recognized her from news coverage. She'd been a nurse at St. Catherine's in the 1970s, had known the Hargrove family personally. "Hello, Emma," Margaret said warmly. "Hello, Rose. Thank you for letting me be part of this." "Thank you for coming," Rose said. "Your testimony helped us understand what really happened here." Margaret had been crucial to the case against Sinclair and Mallory. She'd testified about the Hargroves' character, their dedication to the children, their fear in the days before they disappeared. She'd confirmed details from Richard's journal, giving credibility to everything Emma and Rose had found. The ceremony began. The mayor spoke first, talking about Millbrook's resilience and bright future. Emma barely listened. Her eyes kept drifting to the building, to the windows where she knew children would soon be living. Kids who'd been told they were unwanted, that they were problems, that they'd never amount to anything. She knew those feelings. She'd felt them herself after her parents died, moving into Rose's tiny apartment, knowing they barely had enough for one person, let alone two. She'd felt like a burden, something extra that didn't quite fit. These kids would feel different. She'd make sure of it. Patricia Chen spoke next, explaining the Foundation's mission. The Hargrove Carter Foundation exists to provide safe homes, quality education, and emotional support for children in foster care. We believe every child deserves stability, opportunity, and most importantly, the knowledge that someone believes in them. She gestured toward the building. St. Catherine's will house 15 children in family-style units. They'll have access to counselors, tutors, art programs, music lessons, anything that helps them discover who they are and who they can become. And this is just the beginning. We plan to open 3 more facilities in Pennsylvania over the next 5 years. More applause. Emma watched the board members nodding, these people who'd volunteered their time and expertise to help build something lasting. Not one of them had asked for payment. They'd all said the same thing. This work was its own reward. Then it was Rose's turn to speak. Emma watched her grandmother approach the microphone, shoulders back, chin up. The woman who'd once worked 3 jobs just to keep them fed now stood before hundreds, about to address not just them, but the television cameras broadcasting this moment across the state. 6 months ago, Rose began, her voice steady. My granddaughter and I were barely surviving. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. I worked every hour I could. We ate canned soup and day-old bread. We were invisible. Just 2 more people in a forgotten town, struggling to get by. She paused, letting that sink in. Then Emma did something brave. She climbed through a broken window on Christmas Eve, not looking for treasure, just curious about a building everyone said was haunted. What she found changed our lives. But more importantly, it gave us a chance to change other lives. Rose looked directly at Emma. My granddaughter taught me something. She taught me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. She was 8 years old, standing in that hidden room surrounded by millions of dollars in art. And you know what she did? She took one small painting and brought it home to show me. Because she knew it was important. She knew it belonged to someone. She knew the truth mattered more than money. Tears streamed down Emma's face. She hadn't cried in months, had learned to hold it together through the trials and interviews and endless attention. But hearing her grandmother's pride, seeing the way Rose looked at her, broke something open inside. We didn't find that collection for ourselves, Rose continued. We found it for the Hargrove family, so their story could finally be told. We found it for the families whose art was stolen by Nazis, so they could reclaim their heritage. We found it for these children who'll live here, who'll have a safe place because 2 people chose to help others instead of helping themselves. That's what the Hargroves believed. That's what Emma believes. And that's what this foundation will always stand for. The applause was thunderous. People rose to their feet. Emma saw Agent Webb wiping his eyes. Sarah Mitchell was openly crying as her cameraman recorded everything. Then Margaret Pierce approached the microphone. "May I say something?" she asked. The crowd quieted. Margaret's voice was soft but clear. I worked at St. Catherine's for 12 years. I knew Richard and Victoria Hargrove as well as anyone. They were extraordinary people who believed that every child, no matter their circumstances, deserved love and opportunity. She pulled out a weathered photograph. This was taken in 1978, 1 year before they disappeared. See these children? She pointed to a group of kids standing with the Hargroves in front of the orphanage. Most of them went on to live good lives. They became teachers, nurses, mechanics, parents, because the Hargroves gave them stability and hope. Margaret looked directly at Emma. When I heard about you, about what you found and what you did with it, I thought the Hargroves would have loved this girl. They would have been so proud, because you embody everything they believed in: courage, honesty, generosity, compassion. You're 8 years old and you've already changed the world. Imagine what you'll do with the rest of your life. Emma couldn't hold it together anymore. She stepped forward and hugged Margaret, this woman who'd known the people whose legacy she was now carrying. Margaret held her tight and whispered, "They're watching, sweetheart, and they're smiling." After the speeches, it was time for the ribbon cutting. Emma and Rose stood on either side of a wide red ribbon stretched across the entrance. The mayor tried to position himself in the photo, but Patricia gently moved him aside. "This moment belongs to them," she said firmly. Emma and Rose held the oversized scissors together. Cameras flashed. The crowd counted down. 3, 2, 1! They cut the ribbon. It fell away and the doors to St. Catherine's opened. Not onto darkness and decay, but onto light and possibility. Tours began immediately. Emma walked through rooms she'd once explored with only a flashlight. Now they were warm and bright, painted in cheerful colors. The dormitory she'd seen filled with rusting bed frames now held comfortable twin beds with new quilts and pillows. Each bed had a small shelf for personal items, a reading lamp, a sense of home. The old classroom had been converted into a modern learning center with computers, books, art supplies. The kitchen, where industrial ovens once rusted, now gleamed with new appliances, ready to provide real meals, family dinners, birthday cakes. And in the basement, where Emma had first discovered the hidden room, there was now a museum. Glass cases displayed photographs of the Hargrove family, newspaper articles about their disappearance, and documentation of the art collection's discovery. The false wall had been preserved behind protective glass, and visitors could peer into the space where masterpieces had hidden for 40 years. One exhibit showed Emma's school photo beside the Monet she'd carried home that Christmas morning. The placard read, "Sometimes the greatest treasures are found by those brave enough to look where others fear to go." Emma stood in front of it, remembering that night. The cold, the fear, the overwhelming sense that she'd stumbled into something bigger than herself. She'd been right. She just hadn't known how big. "Pretty cool seeing yourself in a museum," a voice said behind her. Emma turned. A girl about her age stood there, maybe 9 or 10, with curly red hair and suspicious eyes. She wore jeans and a sweatshirt that had seen better days. Behind her stood a social worker holding a folder. "I'm Emma," Emma said. "I know who you are," the girl replied. "Everyone knows who you are. You're the kid who found all the money." "I found art," Emma corrected gently. "The money came after." "Same difference." The girl crossed her arms. "My name's Claire. I'm supposed to be living here now, in the orphanage." "It's not an orphanage anymore," Emma said. "It's a home." Claire snorted. "Sure, that's what they all say, until you screw up. Then it's just another place that kicks you out." Emma recognized that tone, the defensive shield kids built when they'd been disappointed too many times. She'd felt it herself, that certainty that nothing good could last. "How many placements have you been in?" Emma asked quietly. Claire's eyes flickered with surprise at the directness. 7, since I was 6. My mum had problems. Dad was never around. Nobody wants a kid with an attitude problem." "I don't think you have an attitude problem," Emma said. "I think you've learned to protect yourself. That's smart." For the first time, Claire's hard expression softened slightly. "Yeah, well, we'll see how long this place lasts before they realize I'm too much trouble." Emma made a decision. "Want to see something cool?" Claire shrugged. "I guess." Emma led her upstairs to what had been the administration wing. One room had been converted into a library, floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with books, but Emma took Claire past that, down a hallway to a door marked Reading Room. Inside was a cozy space with beanbag chairs, soft lighting, and walls painted like a forest. But the special thing was the window seat, a wide ledge with cushions and a view of the hills beyond Millbrook. "This was my idea," Emma said. "When they were planning the renovation, I asked them to make one room just for reading and thinking, somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. Because sometimes you need to get away from everyone and just be." Claire sat on the window seat carefully, like she was afraid it might disappear. She looked out at the view, at the hills rolling green in the spring sunshine. Why'd you give away all that money? She asked suddenly. You could have been rich. Could have gone anywhere, done anything. Emma sat beside her. We kept some, enough to be okay, but the rest, it didn't feel like it was really ours. It felt like it belonged to something bigger, to the Hargroves' dream, to kids who needed help. Kids like me, Claire said quietly. Kids like both of us, Emma corrected. My parents died when I was 6. I moved in with my grandma. We were poor, really poor. I know what it's like to feel like you don't matter, like the world forgot about you. Claire looked at her with new eyes. But you're like, famous now. I'm a kid who got lucky and tried to do something good with it, Emma said. That's all. And I'm telling you, this place is different. The people here actually care. They're not going to give up on you. How do you know? Because I picked them, Emma said simply. Me and my grandma. We interviewed everyone who works here. We made sure they understood what it's like to be a kid nobody wants. We made sure they'd stick around even when things got hard. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, That's pretty cool, that you got to help choose. Want to know a secret? Emma asked. Claire nodded. You get to choose too. This place only works if you let it, if you're willing to trust, even a little bit. Nobody's going to force you to be happy here. But if you give it a chance, if you let people care about you, I think you might be surprised. Something passed between them in that moment. Understanding, maybe. Recognition. 2 kids who'd learned to survive on their own, finding a tentative connection. I'll think about it, Claire said. That's all anyone can ask, Emma replied. They sat together in the reading room as the dedication ceremony continued below. 2 girls who'd been dealt difficult hands, sharing a moment of quiet in a building that had once held only darkness and secrets. When they finally went back downstairs, the other children who'd be living at St. Catherine's had arrived. 15 kids, aged 8 to 17, each carrying a garbage bag or small suitcase containing everything they owned. Social workers guided them through the building, showing them their rooms, introducing them to house parents and staff. Emma watched from the stairs as they explored, saw their expressions shift from suspicion to cautious hope. She saw a boy about 12 discover the game room, complete with pool table and video games. Saw 2 younger girls squeal when they found out they'd be sharing a room, their own room, not a dormitory with dozens of others. Saw Claire standing alone in the hallway, still guarded, but looking around with something like wonder in her eyes. Rose appeared beside Emma on the stairs. You did good with that girl. I saw you talking. She reminds me of me, Emma said. Before all this, scared and trying to hide it. Rose put her arm around Emma's shoulders. You're going to help a lot of kids here, baby. Not with money, but with understanding, with your story. Is that what I am now? Emma asked. A story? You're a person first, Rose said firmly. A smart, kind, brave person. The story is just what happened to you. It doesn't define you unless you let it. As the afternoon wore on, the official ceremony gave way to a community celebration. Local restaurants had donated food. Tables laden with sandwiches, salads, and desserts filled the lawn. Music played from speakers someone had set up. Children from the town mingled with children from the home, the boundaries between them gradually fading. Emma found herself talking to reporters one last time. Sarah Mitchell had requested a final interview, wanted to know how Emma felt now that everything had come full circle. 6 months ago, you climbed through a broken window, Sarah said, camera rolling. Did you ever imagine it would lead to this? Emma thought carefully before answering. No. I just wanted to see what was inside. But I think that's how important things start. Not with big plans, but with curiosity, with being brave enough to look. What would you say to other kids watching this? Kids who might be going through hard times? Emma looked directly into the camera. I'd say you're not invisible. Even when it feels like nobody sees you, like nobody cares, you matter. And sometimes the smallest act of courage, doing one thing that scares you, can change everything. Don't wait for someone else to make your life better. Look for the broken windows. Climb through. See what's on the other side. Sarah lowered the camera, tears in her eyes. That's beautiful, Emma. Thank you. As evening approached and the crowd began to thin, Emma walked through the building one more time. In the museum, she stopped in front of Richard Hargrove's journal, now displayed behind glass. She read the final entry again, the one written days before he and Victoria disappeared. "If we don't survive, I pray someone finds this journal and finishes what we started. Return these pieces to their rightful owners. Tell our story. Don't let them win." Emma touched the glass gently. "We finished it," she whispered. "You didn't die for nothing. Your story got told. And because of you, because of what you believed in, dozens of kids are going to have a chance. That's winning. That's everything." She felt a presence beside her. Claire stood there, hands in her pockets, looking at the journal. "The people who used to own this place," Claire said. "They died trying to do the right thing?" Emma nodded. "That's kind of badass," Claire said. Emma smiled. "Yeah, it really is." "You think they'd be happy about what you did?" "I hope so," Emma said. "I think they would. I think they'd be happy that St. Catherine's is helping kids again, that their collection went to people who really needed it, that the truth came out even 40 years later." Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm going to try, to give this place a chance, like you said." Emma felt warmth spread through her chest. "I'm glad. And if you ever need someone to talk to, someone who gets it, I live 10 minutes away. You can call any time." "Really?" "Really." For the first time, Claire smiled. A real smile, not the defensive smirk from earlier. "Okay, thanks, Emma." As night fell over Millbrook, lights glowed from St. Catherine's windows. Inside, children who'd been strangers that morning were becoming a family. House parents helped them unpack their few belongings, showed them how to use the washer and dryer, promised that tomorrow they'd go shopping for new clothes, school supplies, whatever they needed. Outside, Rose and Emma stood on the front steps, looking up at the building that had changed their lives. "You ready to go home?" Rose asked. Emma nodded. But as they walked toward the car, she looked back one more time. This place had been abandoned, forgotten, considered worthless. Now it blazed with light and life and possibility. Just like her, just like Rose, just like all the kids who'd been told they didn't matter. Sometimes, Emma thought, the most valuable things are the ones everyone else overlooks. The forgotten buildings, the overlooked people, the small acts of courage that seem insignificant until suddenly they're not. They drove home through streets that felt different now, more alive. The town that had been dying was finding new breath, new purpose. And at the heart of it all was a story about a little girl brave enough to climb through a broken window on Christmas Eve. 3 years later, Emma stood on a stage at the second Hargrove Carter facility, cutting another ribbon. She was 11 now, taller, more confident, but still the same girl who'd followed her curiosity into the dark. Beside her stood Claire, who'd not only thrived at St. Catherine's, but had become Emma's closest friend. The foundation had grown beyond anyone's expectations. 4 homes operating across Pennsylvania, over 60 children given stability and hope. A dozen had been adopted into permanent families. Others had aged out and gone to college on scholarships the foundation provided. Emma had become the face of it all, not because she sought attention, but because her story resonated. She spoke at schools, at conferences, at fundraisers. She told anyone who'd listen that one person, even a child, could make a difference. Rose had retired from all her jobs and now worked full-time with the foundation, managing operations and finances. She'd discovered she had a gift for organization and strategy. Who knew, she'd joke, that all those years juggling 3 jobs would prepare her to run a multi-million-dollar non-profit? The art world had been transformed by the case, too. New laws made it easier to return stolen art to families. Museums began proactively researching their collection's provenance. The Hargrove name became synonymous with doing the right thing, even at great personal cost. And Robert Sinclair's conviction had sent shockwaves through the world of wealthy collectors. Several other cases were reopened. More stolen art was recovered and returned. The ripple effects of Emma's discovery on Christmas Eve continued spreading, touching lives she'd never meet. But Emma's favorite moments weren't the big events or the national coverage. They were the quiet ones, reading in the library at St. Catherine's with a group of younger kids clustered around, hanging on every word. Teaching a teenager how to change a tire because Rose had taught her, and now she could pass it on. Getting letters from kids who'd lived at Hargrove Carter homes and moved on to bright futures, thanking her for believing in them. One letter in particular stayed with Emma. It came from a boy named Marcus, who'd aged out of foster care at 18 and was now studying engineering at Penn State. "Dear Emma," he wrote, "when I moved into St. Catherine's 3 years ago, I thought my life was over. I'd been in 9 placements. I'd given up on adults, on the system, on myself. But you proved me wrong, not just by creating this place, but by showing up, by talking to us like we mattered, by sharing your own story so we knew we weren't alone. I'm going to be an engineer now. I'm going to build things that last. And it's because you showed me that broken things can be fixed, forgotten things can be found, and invisible people can be seen. Thank you for climbing through that window. Thank you for being brave. I'm trying to be brave too." Emma kept that letter in her desk drawer. On hard days when the foundation work felt overwhelming, or when she struggled with the attention that never fully went away, she'd read it and remember why all of this mattered. Now, at 11 years old, standing at the dedication of the newest home, Emma looked out at the crowd. More faces than she'd seen at St. Catherine S. Media from around the world, donors who'd been inspired by the story, and most importantly, the children whose lives would be changed by this place. When it was her turn to speak, Emma didn't read from notes. She just spoke from her heart. 3 years ago, I was a scared little girl who climbed through a broken window because I was lonely and curious. I found something amazing, something valuable, something that had been hidden for 40 years. But you know what I learned? The real treasure wasn't the art. It was the story. The Hargrove's story about sacrifice and courage. The family's stories about loss and recovery. And now, all your stories. She gestured to the children who'd be living here. You are the treasure. You're the reason this foundation exists. Not because you're broken or need fixing, but because you're valuable exactly as you are. And this place exists to help you see that, to give you time and space and support to become whoever you're meant to be. Emma's voice grew stronger. People ask me all the time if I'm proud of what I did. And yeah, I'm proud. But not because I found millions of dollars in art. I'm proud because I asked questions, because I told the truth. Because when I had a choice between keeping something valuable and giving it away to help others, I chose others, and I'd make that same choice every single time. She looked at Rose, standing off to the side with tears streaming down her face. My grandma taught me that. She taught me that being rich isn't about how much money you have. It's about how much you're willing to give, how much you're willing to sacrifice for people you'll never meet, how much you believe that every life has value, especially the ones the world tries to forget. The applause was deafening, but Emma barely heard it. She was looking at the children's faces, seeing hope there, seeing possibility. Seeing herself 3 years ago, small and scared and wondering if she'd ever matter. She mattered now. Not because of money or fame, but because she'd chosen to care, chosen to act, chosen to believe that one person could make a difference. Anyone can change lives if they're willing to look in the forgotten places, if they're brave enough to tell the truth, and if they're generous enough to give away what they find. As the sun set over Pennsylvania, Emma Carter stood between two worlds, the scared 8-year-old who'd climbed through a broken window and the confident young woman she was becoming. Behind her stood St. Catherine S., transformed from a tomb of secrets into a beacon of hope. Ahead of her stretched a future bright with possibility, with more homes to build, more kids to help, more stories to tell. But in that moment, she was just Emma, standing beside her grandmother who'd sacrificed everything to raise her, surrounded by kids who'd been told they were worthless, holding the knowledge that sometimes the smallest act of courage creates ripples that never stop spreading. She'd climbed through a broken window on Christmas Eve and found a fortune. But the real gift wasn't the art or the money. It was the reminder that everyone, no matter how small or overlooked, has the power to change the world. You just have to be brave enough to look in the dark. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that courage comes in all sizes and that sometimes the greatest treasures are found by those who dare to seek them.